Welcome everyone, and everyone has their Bible open at chapter 2 of Paul's letter to the Philippians. And that's great if Philippians will be closer to the end of the Bible. Just waiting while Jim finds it. While everyone is getting the right location, you'll remember that the letter is written by a man named Paul, and he is in prison. He doesn't say where, but probably in Rome, and he's writing to a church that he established or founded in the Greek city of Philippi. And so he is writing to them to let them know how he is doing. And we saw in chapter 1 that he is unsure about his future. It's possible he will be executed by the Romans for his preaching of Jesus. It's also possible he will be released or spend more time in prison. He doesn't know. So he is writing to the Philippians to let them know his situation and also to encourage them. So there's much in this letter to encourage us on how to live the Christian life. We saw in chapter 2 that Paul wished for the Philippian Christians, and he wishes for us, to be of one mind. To be of one mind. One, a single, and mind, the way we think. And in particular, what Paul is talking about is having the same mind or attitude that Jesus had. And in the early part of chapter 2, he talked about Jesus not clinging to his glory as God the Son, but becoming a human being. We call that the incarnation. We used that word when we looked earlier. Incarnation. Incarnation. I've told you before that I spent some time in Brazil. 4 years I lived in Brazil. And the Portuguese word for meat is carne. And you can see it in this word, incarnation. It means to take on flesh, to become a human being. But buried in there is this word, meat or flesh. So Jesus became a human being, and Paul says Jesus not only became a human being, but he died for our sins on the cross. And God raised him from the dead and exalted him to the highest place. So Paul wants the Philippian Christians and us to have that mind, the mind of a servant, the mind who takes the low places in order for other people to do well. And that was the mind of Jesus. Some years ago, with at least Tim was here, and maybe Helen as well, I worked through the Gospel of Mark. And that's the story of Jesus. And we saw Jesus touching a leper, somebody with a terrible skin disease that everyone stayed away from. He would touch the leper and heal him. With all the people on the margins of society, Jesus cared about and welcomed to be part of his new people. And we're to have that same mind. Now we're picking up the story in verse 25, chapter 2 and verse 25. So our custom is to each person read one verse. Now if you're comfortable, we'll let Rachel and Kennedy also take a turn. But if you're comfortable, but let's start with Catherine, if you would read 25, and we're going to read to the end of the chapter through verse 30.
I think it is necessary to send back to your
Epaphroditus. It's Epaphroditus.
It's a name?
Yeah, it's a name. Yeah.
My brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs.
For he longs for all of yours and is distressed, because you heard he was ill.
Indeed, he was ill, near to death. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow.
Therefore I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad and I may have less anxiety.
Welcome him in your Lord with great joy, and honor men like him.
Okay, we just pause there. The word honor, the H is silent in that word, so we pronounce it honor without the H. You just learn this by experience. Some words that begin with H, the H is sounded, a H sound, like in way H, there's the H sound. In some words the H is silent, and in this word honor, the H is silent. Go ahead.
Because he almost died for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for the help you could not give me.
Now let's see if you are, oops,
Sorry, too closer to you.
if you are grasping what is going
let's
on.
move the table.
Epaphroditus is a name, and we can discern from Paul's letter that Epaphroditus is from Philippi. And the Philippian Christians sent him to Rome with, we would call it in English, a care package. Have you heard that expression, a care package? A care package. Package is usually a box or a bag of something. Maybe has groceries or books or something. Anything can be in a package. It has within it the word pack. The verb to pack means to put things in a container of some sort. If you're traveling, you pack a suitcase. You put your clothes in and close it up. If you are moving from one apartment to another, you pack your belongings in boxes. And we call those a package, what is contained in a box or something. So Dragonfly and UPS and Perlator, they deliver packages. There'll be a box or a bag or something with something inside it. Care, to care means to extend kindness to someone by providing what they need, to care. So a care package is when your grandmother, you're about to go off on a trip and your grandmother packs in a package some things to eat, perhaps some medicine, perhaps some extra clothes. We call that in English a care package. To send you off so that you have everything you need. It's an expression. So the people in Philippi sent Epaphroditus to Rome with some things. perhaps some money, perhaps some food, perhaps some clothing, perhaps some scrolls. What a scroll is, it's paper wrapped up and then you open it like that. It's called a scroll. In the ancient world, they did not have books like this. They put information on paper, long pieces of paper, and they would roll it up to carry it. That's called a scroll. Scroll. And it would look roughly like this when it's all rolled up, and then you could unroll it. We still use that word today. We don't have scrolls anymore, we have books. But sometimes we say we are scrolling on our phone. We scroll on our phone, we call that scrolling, or like this, when we're looking at many things. And just like a scroll, you would open a little bit, roll it up, open a little bit, roll it up. We work through long threads of material on our phone with our finger, so we call that scrolling as well. So Epaphroditus may have brought some scrolls of the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures. But we know that he came to meet Paul's needs. I don't know what prisons are like in China. I hope you've never been in a prison. In Canada, when someone is imprisoned, the government provides all they need. But in many countries, that's not the way. In Brazil, for example, or Bolivia, I'm aware of, family has to provide food, clothing, things like that in prisons. In China, is it like that? Or does the government provide clothes and food for prisoners? You don't know?
Family needs to pay the bill.
Family needs to pay, yeah. Well, it was like that in the ancient world. So Paul depended upon friends to bring food, clothing, books, things like that to him. So Epaphroditus had come, traveled. He would have walked or taken a ship across the Aegean Sea. And anyway, he went eventually to Rome. I guess it would be the Adriatic Sea he would have crossed. Anyway, he would have traveled to Rome, if Paul was there, and brought things to him. But it turns out that he became sick. But you see in verse 25, he calls him my brother, fellow worker, fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. So a messenger brings information, and also he brought things to care for Paul. But he became ill. Paul says in verse 26, for he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. So let's look at those words. The verb to long for, almost always it's followed by the preposition for. One of the trickiest parts of a language is using the prepositions that follow certain verbs. We simply have patterns that have no logic around them. So usually the verb to long is followed by the preposition for, to long for. Now we have the adjective long. This table is a long table, stretches a distance. But to long for, a synonym would be to desire, or to feel a need, to want something. To long for is to want something. So the children long for Christmas Day to come. They get excited and are waiting for Christmas Day. They are longing for it, desiring it, wishing it would come. To long for. Before I was married, when I was dating my wife, the woman that became my wife, we were at a Bible school, and I had to work after the term was finished. She went on a tour with the other students, and I longed for her to return and felt her absence very much. The word is used like that here. Epaphroditus has fallen ill, and he longs for home. Often when we are ill, we long for home, for the people we know to care for us. Do you sometimes long for China? No? Wei says no. Jin says
Both
no.
of my parents passed away before I came to Canada.
Okay, so your ties are not there anymore. Yeah. For some people who have family back home, maybe you long for certain things about China more than everything, but just certain things, maybe certain places that are close to your heart. The verb to long is an expression of the heart. We're talking about the heart and what we desire, what we care deeply about, we long for. So Epaphroditus is longing for his church family, the other people in Philippi. And he has grown ill, and he wants to go home and to be home. So Paul is going to send him home. Probably Epaphroditus carried the letter that we're reading and that the church preserved and copied. So probably there was no mail service in the ancient world. Letters had to be carried by people who would travel. Hello, Alex. So he longs for you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Distress. You can see the word stress inside there as well. I have a granddaughter. I have actually 5 granddaughters, but one of them was writing an examination last night. She's in her 3rd year of the education program at the University of Regina. So she had an examination in a psychology course. She was feeling a lot of stress at supper time. She was at our house at supper time. The exam was at 7 p.m., so she was feeling a lot of stress. You know what stress is, where you feel anxiety. You cannot sit still, you cannot rest, you are not at peace, you're feeling stress. Well, distress is a certain kind of stress. It's a sadness that something about your life perhaps is upsetting someone else. That's what Epaphroditus is feeling. He knows his friends back home in Philippi have learned he is ill. And he is upset that they are worried about him. So he now is feeling distress until he can go home and communicate that he is all right. So he's feeling distress. Is that word clear? You know the word? How you could use that word in a sentence? To be distressed, upset, worried, not at peace. I'm sure a good example would be that people in Canada who are from Syria would have been feeling distress when things were happening in Syria. The rebels were moving in, and they would have been worried about family back home and are probably still wondering if family is okay. Or I remember some years ago, maybe 2006, there was a terrible earthquake in China. And I remember many people that I knew here were very distressed until they gained news of how family was back in China. Do you remember that earthquake? I can't remember.
Wenchuan.
Okay, and do you remember what year, Chin?
2008.
2008.
Yeah, 2008.
Okay, yeah, it was terrible.
Yeah,
It was just
it was terrible.
So people here would feel distress, worried until they found out how family was and if people were still alive and so on. So he was feeling distress. And Paul says he was ill and almost died, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. So Paul is saying, I have enough worries, so I don't need one more worry of Epaphroditus being so ill he might die. So Paul was so relieved when Epaphroditus regained his strength and was well again and could go home. So there's a nice turn of phrase there, worry upon worry, as well as the word to spare.
Talk about both of those.
Let's talk about the verb to spare. The way Paul is using it has more than one meaning. But the way Paul is using it, you can imagine a governor who has a prisoner who is deserving of death. But he may decide to spare him, meaning he will not put him to death, but allow him to live. That would be to spare someone. To not carry out a sentence, but relieve them of that and perhaps set them free or do something else, to spare. It's used in another way, though, commonly in Canada. If you're walking in Victoria Park, you may, in the summertime at least, encounter a poor person who puts out their hand and they say, "Do you have any spare change?" That is, money that is not essential to you, that you could give to that person. Do you have any spare change? Or they might say, to use it as a verb, "Can you spare me $1 or $2? Could you spare me?" they'll say. That means, can you do without it and give it to me if it's not essential to you? We'll use it that way as well. But we also use it as an adjective that all of us who have a car or a vehicle will carry a spare tire. A spare tire. That is, it's not needed most of the time. It's spare. It's not essential. We have 4 tires, 4 wheels, but if we get a flat tire, we must use the spare to put on. But we call it a spare because it's set aside, it's not needed, at least not right now, but it may be needed someday. So that's to spare. But Paul says that God had mercy on him and spared him grief. That is, he removed the grief from Paul. So Paul did not have to experience that grief of the death of Epaphroditus. Then there's a nice turn of phrase there in English. He spared me worry upon worry. It's just an expression, but a good expression. Worry is thinking about what might happen that is bad. My granddaughter was worried that she might not remember everything for her examination. That was her anxiety or her stress. If you hear that somebody back in China is ill, you may worry. You wonder, are they okay? And your heart is sad and you are not at peace. You are worried about it. Sometimes we worry about money. We don't have enough money. We worry, what will I do? So on. Worry upon worry. Upon is a preposition. So my glasses are upon my Bible right now. They're on top of. But worry upon worry means a stack of worries. And sometimes life brings us worry upon worry. I'm not only worried about finances, I'm worried about my ill father. I'm also worried about my health. I worry upon worry. It's a nice expression that Paul uses here. So he says, therefore I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad, and I may have less anxiety. So anxiety would be a synonym for worry. They're really the same thing. To worry, to have anxiety, to have cares that are a burden to you. Things that you're uncertain about that may be negative. That would be cares or anxieties or worries. And Paul says, welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honor men like him. Epaphroditus may be feeling guilty because he represented the Philippian church and was supposed to help Paul, but he grew ill, so Paul now has to look after him. So he may have been feeling guilty that he has failed. He has not been a good messenger, not a good support to Paul. So Paul says, welcome him. He did his very best. He's a good man. So welcome him back home with joy and honor men like him. And I think you know the word honor, to show great respect. Okay? Because he almost died for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for the help you could not give me. They are too far away to help Paul. They are many miles away, but Epaphroditus brought their help to him. Okay, we'll look at one more verb. To risk. Do you know that verb? To risk. To risk. There's a board game called Risk. I don't know if you've ever encountered it, in which you try to conquer the world. But anyway, that's to risk. To risk means to take a chance. To set out in uncertain territory. So risk is a part of life. Anytime we make a major change, we step out in faith and we risk. When we start a new business and put our money into it, we risk. When you leave the familiar life you knew in China and come to Canada, there's risk involved, isn't there?
And also for some disease, there are risk factors.
Yes, good. That's another way we use that. So if you become overweight, there are risks with that. If you don't eat your vegetables, there are risks with that as well. And so on. Yeah. There are many kinds of risks. So it's both a verb, to risk. It's also a noun, risk factors. Yeah. Okay. Anything else in that paragraph? Any other words I haven't talked about that you would not sure about? I hope you understand the meaning of the paragraph. Well, let's go on then. And I It's Chin's turn to read at verse 1. Let's just read, well, let's read right through verse 6, from chapter 3, from verses 1 through verse 6.
Further, my brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord. It is no trouble for me to write the same things to you again, and it is a safeguard for you.
Good. Want to try, Rachel? You want to try verse 2?
Yeah.
Watch out for these dogs, these heavy girls. They are those mutilators of the flesh.
Yeah, mutilators. Mutilators
Mutilators.
of the flesh.
三章第二
Right.
三章
I'll
第
explain
三
the
节
word in a moment. And verse 3 then, Kennedy.
腓立比3是吗？
对 For it is.
It should be Philippians 3 and verse 3.
For where they
Circumcision.
circumcision, which worship God in the Spirit, and rejoice in Christ Jesus, and have no confidence in the flesh.
Okay.
Though I myself have reasons for such confidence, if someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more.
Circumcised.
On the 8 days of the people of Israel, of the third tribe of
Benjamin.
Hebrew of the Hebrews, in the regard to the law, Philippi.
Pharisee.
Pharisee.
There's a lot of difficult words in there. Okay. Ellen, verse 6.
As to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness under the law, blameless.
Or faultless, I have. Okay, there's a lot of difficult words in there. And at the heart of this is a Jewish custom called circumcision. And circumcision was the removal of the foreskin of the penis for all males on the 8th day of their life. That was their practice, and it set them aside, or was a marker, a physical marker of belonging to the people of God. That's circumcision. And Paul was inviting non-Jews, whom we call Gentiles. We are all Gentiles here. Anyone who's not a Jew is a Gentile. He was inviting them to come into the family of God simply on the basis of faith, putting their faith in Jesus. But some Jewish Christians thought that wasn't enough, that these new people in the family of God must also become Jews, must be circumcised. And Paul said no. So that's what's underneath what he's talking about here. But let's look at the words. Finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. I've mentioned that even though Paul is in prison, he is a man of joy, of deep joy. He feels good about life. He is positive and content and confident. He feels joy because of his confidence in Jesus, serving Jesus. And he even said back in chapter 1, if I die, that's okay. I'll go to be with Jesus. I'm not afraid. If I live, I will serve Jesus, even if I must suffer. And through it all, he felt a joy. And that's what Jesus would want all of us to feel. So he says, rejoice in the Lord. Then he says, it is no trouble for me to write the same things to you again, and it is a safeguard for you. So let's look at a couple of words there. Let's look at the word trouble first. Trouble can be a noun, or it can also be a verb. Trouble is simply problems that come into our life. Or we can also say you were off to university and you ran out of money, and you phone home and you say, I'm in trouble. I have no money for food or for my rent. Could you help me? So to be in trouble means to be in conditions that are a real problem, that I need help with. But trouble can be all kinds of things. If I'm traveling on the highway and the engine on my car stops working, I would say I'm having car trouble. If we're having difficulty in getting along with our spouse, we might say I'm having marriage trouble. Or I'm having family trouble, if there's difficulties and so on. So it's a general word that covers problems of almost any kind. It can be relational problems or physical problems. We might even say, my vision is troubled, that I'm not seeing clearly. So we use it in many, many different ways. Paul is using it in a special way. He's saying, it's no trouble for me to do this. Marilyn and I, my wife, gave a ride to a friend of ours who has a cat who was sick, and she phoned and asked us to give her a ride to the animal hospital. So we did that, and then we took her back later that day to pick up the cat. And she apologized, it's so far, and we said, it's no trouble. Understand that phrase? It's no trouble. And I'm happy to do it. It's not a big problem for me. It's no trouble. And that's how Paul is using it here. It's no trouble for me to repeat my teaching. What Paul means is that many truths need to be spoken over and over and over again for us to grasp them. So Paul says, I don't mind repeating my teaching. It's no trouble to me. I'm not bothered by it. And it's a safeguard for you. And you can see two words here. Safe, and we use that word in many ways. If you were out in a storm, and we've had snowstorms recently and icy roads, if you're out at night, the snow is coming, you can hardly see, your car is sliding. When you get home, get in the house, you say, I'm safe. I'm out of the storm, out of the trouble, out of the problems. Here everything is good. I'm safe. So that's the way we use that. We use the word, though, in other ways. In baseball, if a batter hits the ball and runs to first base, if he arrives before the ball arrives, the umpire says, safe. So he is allowed to stay on the base and become a base runner. So we say he's safe that way. But we also use it as a noun. A safe is where you keep your valuables, or where a bank keeps money in a safe, a steel box with a lock on it, often a timer and things where they keep all the money. So that's the word safe. Guard. I have at home what's called a skill saw. It's a power saw that I run with one hand. It has a blade that spins around to cut wood. And it has on there a guard which keeps my hand from touching the blade as it spins. So it guards my hand and keeps it safe. We sometimes have on highways, if there is a steep drop-off, guard rails, which is like a fence that keeps cars from going over. That's called a guard rail. In basketball, certain players will guard other players. That they try to keep them from scoring a basket. They'll guard them. That's all, to guard. Sometimes a bank will have guards patrolling with a gun, and they'll be watching for trouble, so on. That's a guard. So a safeguard combines these two ideas. So Paul is saying, for me to repeat my teaching is a safeguard for you. It will keep you safe in following Jesus, and it will guard you from getting off the path. So it's the two ideas of safety and guarding from trouble. So Paul is saying, for me to repeat my teaching is a safeguard. Is that clear?
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Then he says, watch out for those dogs, those men who do evil. In Paul's world, dogs were not pets. Here in Canada, we often keep dogs as a pet. You have friends who have dogs? Anybody have a dog?
I have.
Oh, you have a dog. Okay, you have a dog. Okay. So this makes no sense to us. We like dogs.
Yeah.
But in much of the world, a dog is a kind of a wild animal and what we call a scavenger. You may not know that word, scavenger. A scavenger is looking for food that's left somewhere. So some birds are scavengers. When, say, an animal is hit on the highway and the carcass is there, scavenger birds will come down and eat that. That's a scavenger. Scavenger.
Yellow dog.
So,
食腐动物。
So dogs in much of the world are scavengers. They're wild, and if you leave food out somewhere, they will come and get it. And they will also take other things that you may leave out, and so people don't like them. So for Paul, the word dog was an insult. So he's calling these Jewish Christians who are saying, you men who have come to faith in Christ must be circumcised. You must be Jew. Paul is calling them an insulting name when he calls them dogs. Those men who do evil, who mutilate the flesh, mutilators of the flesh. The verb is to mutilate, and the that's the adjective if something is mutilated. So sometimes in war, people who kill another soldier, if they wish to bring extra insult against their enemy, they will mutilate the body, cut off arms, perhaps cut the tongue out, cut the ears off, do terrible things like terrible things. So Paul is calling circumcision mutilation, doing unnecessary, unkind things to the body. So he's saying this is not necessary for Christians, for Gentiles to be circumcised. And these people who insist on it are mutilators of the flesh. Then he says in verse 3, "For it is we who are the circumcision." Now he's using it as a metaphor. And it's important that we know this word metaphor. Paul is using circumcision now as a metaphor. And a metaphor, we create a metaphor by taking something common, something physical, something we can see, and using it to help us to understand something that is more abstract, something that is more vague. So we often talk about spiritual things using metaphors. Because we don't have good language otherwise to talk about things we can't see. So Paul is saying we are the circumcision. And he's meaning that when we come to faith in Jesus, Jesus does something in our heart. Now even that's a metaphor, because our heart is simply a physical organ that pumps blood. But we think of the heart as at the center of our emotions and our love. How do we talk about love? How do we talk about these emotions? Well, we use the idea of the heart. The heart feels, the heart loves. And Paul is meaning that Jesus does something to our heart. He changes our heart. He circumcises our hearts. So he's saying we don't need to do something to the flesh, but we need a new heart. And Jesus has done something in our heart. So he's using the idea of circumcision as a metaphor here for what God has done in changing our heart. I told the story last week of God changing my heart when I worked at an institution that cared for mentally ill people. And God changed my way of seeing the men that I was caring for. So he circumcised my heart, he changed my heart, he healed my heart. Sometimes we say, God opens our eyes. And my eyes were open before, but I was seeing the men differently, with new eyes in a way. So that's again all metaphorically. So he says, we are the circumcision, we who worship by the Spirit of God, who glory in Christ Jesus. And that verb to glory, he says, we glory. And glory can be both a verb and a noun, as so many English words can be. As a noun, we would say that a great gymnast from China who wins a gold medal brings glory to his country and to his family. So we treat that person with honor and pride and so on. But glory is fame or acclaim, honor. And to glory means to take pride in something, or to boast in something, to look to something with all our hopes, and to find joy in that. So Paul is saying we glory in Christ. That is, all our hopes are in Jesus. We are so proud of Jesus and who he is and what he has done for us. We glory there. And Paul would contrast that with glorying in the flesh. And by that he goes on to say, I'm a Jew of Jews. I was born to a good family. I was circumcised according to the law. I learned the law. I kept the law. I was a wonderful Jew. But I don't glory in that anymore. In my family, in my race, in my heritage. I glory in Jesus. He's the one who gives me life and makes me proud. And so on. So that's what Paul is saying there. And then he gives some of the reasons why he could put confidence in the flesh. And I'll teach you another word here. He doesn't use this, but it's a good word. The word pedigree. Maybe a new word to you. But pedigree, in the most basic sense, refers to our genetic heritage. So if you buy a dog with a pure pedigree, it means it's not mixed race. Say it's a, I don't know what kind of dog, a German Shepherd, that you could look at this dog's mother and the mother's mother and so on. They are all German Shepherds, right? They have a pure pedigree. That's the story of their ancestors in a sense. And Paul is saying, I have a really good pedigree. Both my parents were Jewish. I was born in a very special tribe within Judaism, the tribe of Benjamin. The first king of Israel was from Benjamin. It's a noble tribe. And I learned the law. In fact, I was a teacher of the law. I have all these things I can list that make me special, make me great. That's my pedigree. And for you, you might say, my family comes from a long line of Chinese people with no mixed blood, no pure, very pure. There are no people of other races or other groups in my line. I'm very pure that way. And my father was a university professor. My grandfather was a medical doctor, and so on, as if that makes me. Paul says, doesn't matter, those things. Compared to knowing Jesus, that's what he'll go on to say. Okay. See, I think I might want to talk about the word zeal and persecution that he used there. You know the word zeal. He says he had great zeal for his faith. And the adjective would be zealous. Do you know that word?
Passion.
Passion, yeah. If you've got zeal, you've got very great passion for something. And the adjective is zealous. So some people have a great zeal for soccer. It's all they want to do is play soccer. Some of our children have a zeal for video games. That's what excites them. It's what they want to do all the time. And they cannot get enough of it. That's to have great zeal for something. Some people have a great zeal for power. And that's what drives them. They want to be the most powerful person. So Paul says he had great zeal for his Judaism and for the law, and actually he persecuted the church. he had so much zeal for God as he understands God, or understood God at the time, that he persecuted the church. So to persecute, or persecution, means to treat some group badly because you think there's something wrong with them, or they're a danger to you or something. So many different groups experience persecution. Chinese people were persecuted in Canada at certain times when Canada allowed some Chinese men to come to help build the railroad, but they wouldn't allow them to bring their families and so on. And sometimes they treated them very badly with prejudice and persecuted them. It's to single out a group and then treat them badly in some way, and often very harshly. So Paul persecuted the church because he thought the church was an enemy of his faith and of his God. But then he met Jesus, and everything changed for him. Everything changed. And he became a supporter of the church and a preacher of the gospel, not a persecutor anymore. And the word righteousness, maybe we'll just finish with that for today. Righteousness, and the adjective is righteous, and it means basically to be in the right, but it also means, especially in this context, being right with God, no longer being an enemy of God, but in right relationship with God. That's a type of righteousness. More generally, though, it can simply mean good. A righteous person is a good person. They will do what is right. A righteous person. None of us are righteous before God. We are sinners. But Jesus died for our sins. And so, united to Jesus, we are considered righteous in God's eyes, in the right. Righteousness. We also use that word somewhat negatively sometimes. If somebody is too proud, we say they are self-righteous. That is, they think they're better than everyone else and they look down on other people. They're proud. So we call that being self-righteous. Righteous in our own eyes, and failing to realize that you are a sinner like everyone else. That's to be righteous. I think we'll finish with that since it's just about 4 o'clock now. And in 3 weeks' time, on January the 4th, we'll pick up the story at verse 7. Any words that you would like to talk about that maybe I missed or that you don't understand?
How about the faultless?
Faultless. Okay, that's a good one. And again, you see that has 2 parts, faultless. Fault is used in many ways, but if my children are fighting, I want to know who's at fault. That is, who is responsible for the fight, who committed the wrong. That's the person who is at fault. If you have an accident, the police want to know what happened, who's at fault? If somebody went through a stop sign and hit you, they are at fault. You are not. You are innocent. The opposite of being at fault is to be innocent. So when Paul says he was faultless, that means he was without sin, without error. without being in the wrong at all. I think, how would I say this, that Paul was blind to his own faults at that point, and he was somewhat self-righteous, thinking, I'm really doing well here. And it was only after meeting Jesus he realized he was not without fault, that he needed a Savior. So, faultless. We use it in other ways as well. In tennis, if you're serving and you hit the ball into the net, that's called a fault. And then you have a second chance, a second serve. But the referee will call out fault, meaning it wasn't a good serve. And you have to do it again. That would be called a fault. But we use it in other ways in sports as well. When you commit a penalty, it can be called a fault as well in some sports. A fault. But faultless means to be without fault, without error, without sin. So I can remember a great gymnast. This is before most of you were born. But in the Olympic Games in Montreal in 1976, a gymnast named Nadia Comici from Romania, she did a whole series of faultless routines. She got a score of 10 on the balance beam and on all these different apparatus. And so we called her routine faultless. There was nothing wrong. The judges could not deduct any marks at all. She was faultless in that routine. So, faultless. But most commonly we use it when the parents will come into the room and say, who's at fault here? Who started this argument? Who? Probably Alex is at fault. No, probably his older sisters are at fault. Who knows? And of course the children always say, he's at fault, and they'll be pointing at him. He's at fault. Who is responsible for the problem? Yeah, so. Okay, well, it was nice to meet you and welcome, and I hope you'll come again, and we'll take a 2-week break for Christmas.
Okay.
Wei is going to Mexico. Wow,
Yes.
have a great time. Hope you enjoy it, and think of us while we're shoveling snow and you're on the
Pastor, we really appreciate your time and effort for
you.
teaching us the Bible English.
yeah.
Small gifts for you and
Thank
Marilyn
you for
from the
that.
whole class.
Oh,
We
thank
wish you a Merry Christmas.
Thank you. That is very, very kind. And Marilyn will appreciate that too.